Ma'am, people like you don't belong here. Officer Mitchell Davis slammed his palm against Dr. Sarah Williams's chest, shoving her backward. Her briefcase hit the marble floor. Papers exploded across the courtroom, scattered like confetti around her simple navy blazer and pearl earrings. Sarah didn't move, didn't speak. Around her, phones lifted, record buttons pressed. The gallery leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Davis stepped closer, his shadow falling over the scattered documents. Among them, a partial letterhead caught the light. Harvard Constitutional. The rest was face down, hidden. Sarah's eyes stayed level with his. Calm, as if she held a secret that could destroy him. The courtroom held its breath. Have you ever been judged so completely wrong that the truth would shock everyone in the room? This is one of those real-life stories that show how black stories of quiet power become the most touching stories of justice. Judge Robert Anderson watched from his bench. His gavel rested in his palm, but he made no move to restore order. The message was clear. This was acceptable behavior in his courtroom. Davis crossed his arms, blocking Sarah's path to the observer seating. This isn't welfare court, lady. You're in the wrong building. His voice carried across the room, designed for maximum humiliation. Sarah's response came quietly, without emotion. Officer, observers have constitutional rights under the Sixth Amendment. The bailiff's face reddened. Don't you quote law at me. I know who belongs here and who doesn't. 3 phones were recording now. A 4th appeared from the back row. The soft glow of live streams began viewer counts climbing in real time. 847 watching, then 1,203. Comments started flooding. This is disgusting. Someone help her. Record everything. Defense attorney James Wilson shifted uncomfortably at his table. He recognized constitutional violations when he saw them, but his client needed this judge's favor. He stayed silent. Court reporter Linda Thompson's fingers hovered over her stenograph keys. She'd stopped typing when the confrontation began. This wasn't going in the official record, not if she could help it. Sarah reached into her blazer pocket slowly, deliberately. Davis tensed, his hand moving toward his radio. Keep your hands where I can see them. She produced a small recording device, no bigger than a thumb drive. Everything is being documented, Officer Davis. Badge number 4,471. The specificity of the number made him pause. How did she know his badge number from this angle? Security, Judge Anderson finally spoke, his voice echoing off the marble walls. Escort this disruption from my courtroom. A second bailiff materialized, Officer Patricia Brown, 15-year veteran, 3 commendations for community service. She looked between Sarah and Davis, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. Your Honor, Sarah's voice cut through the tension, I request to address the court. Anderson's laugh was sharp, dismissive. Ma'am, you have no standing here. This is a court of law, not a community center. The gallery murmured. Someone whispered, That's racist as hell. Another phone appeared, this one from a young law student who recognized the constitutional issues unfolding before her eyes. Sarah's posture remained perfect spine straight, hands clasped behind her back. Her pearl earrings caught the overhead lights as she turned slightly, acknowledging the cameras without appearing to perform for them. Officer Davis, she said, her voice carrying a strange authority, you've made 17 constitutional errors in the past 4 minutes. Would you like me to enumerate them? Davis stepped closer, close enough that his breath fogged her glasses. Lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but it ends now. He reached for his handcuffs. The metallic click echoed in the sudden silence. Ma'am, you're being detained for courtroom disruption under Municipal Code 847.3. The livestream viewers spiked to 15,000. Hashtag courtroom racism began appearing in comment threads. Someone tagged the local news station. Within minutes, Rebecca Miller, investigative reporter for Channel 7, was racing toward the courthouse. Sarah held out her wrists without resistance. "Officer, I need you to understand something very important. The only thing I need to understand is that you're leaving." Now, defense attorney Wilson finally stood. His conscience had reached its breaking point. "Your Honor, perhaps we should hear what this woman has to say." Anderson's gavel slammed down. "Counselor, sit down or join her in contempt. This court will not be lectured by gallery observers." Wilson hesitated, caught between his professional obligations and his moral compass. He sat down. Sarah looked directly at Judge Anderson. "Your Honor, I believe you'll want to examine my credentials before proceeding. I don't care if you're a parking enforcement officer. Remove her." The officers moved toward Sarah from both sides. Davis had his handcuffs ready. Brown looked reluctant but followed protocol. The gallery leaned forward, phones raised, witnessing what appeared to be a textbook case of judicial bias. Sarah's hand moved slowly toward her blazer's inner pocket. Both officers tensed. Davis's hand dropped to his weapon. "Easy," Brown whispered. "Just show us your hands." "I'm reaching for identification," Sarah said calmly. "Nothing more." The courtroom fell silent except for the subtle hum of air conditioning and the barely audible notifications pinging from dozens of phones. The viewer count on the main live stream hit 23,000. Sarah's fingers found what she was looking for, a leather credential case that had remained hidden throughout the confrontation. Her movements were deliberate, practiced, as if she'd done this before in hostile environments. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying a new quality that made even Judge Anderson pause, "before these officers place me under arrest, I suggest you examine these documents very carefully." The leather case emerged from her jacket. It was federal issued, with an embossed seal that few people ever see outside of Washington, D.C. The officers froze mid-step. Judge Anderson's confident smirk began to fade as he recognized the official nature of what Sarah was holding. The power dynamic in the room shifted subtly, like a tide beginning to turn. The federal credential case gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Judge Anderson squinted from his elevated bench, trying to make out the details from 15 feet away. Whatever confidence he'd displayed moments earlier began cracking like ice under pressure. "Your Honor," Sarah repeated, her voice steady as a metronome, "these documents require your immediate attention." Anderson's jaw tightened. He'd spent 12 years on this bench, 8 more as a prosecutor. No one, especially not some woman from the gallery, was going to challenge his authority in his own courtroom. "Officer Davis, I said remove her. Now." Davis moved forward, but his steps had lost their earlier aggression. The federal case in Sarah's hands had changed something fundamental in the room's atmosphere. Still, orders were orders. "Ma'am, you need to come with me." Sarah didn't resist as Davis approached, but she held the credential case higher, ensuring the cameras captured every detail. "Officer, I strongly advise you to examine these documents before proceeding with any arrest. I don't care if you're the mayor's wife. Judge's orders are judge's orders." The live stream comment section exploded. Viewer count hit 31,000 and climbing. Someone had shared the stream to Twitter, where it was being retweeted by verified accounts. # Justice Watch began trending locally. Rebecca Miller burst through the courthouse's main entrance, her camera operator trailing behind. They'd made it from the station in 12 minutes, a new record. Her phone buzzed with notifications as the story spread across social media platforms. Inside the courtroom, defense attorney Wilson had gone pale. He recognized federal credentials when he saw them, even from his position 20 feet away. The embossed seal was unmistakable: Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. Court reporter Thompson's hands trembled slightly over her stenograph keys. She'd been transcribing municipal court proceedings for 9 years. She'd never seen anything like this unfold in real time. "Your Honor," Wilson stood again, his voice strained, "I believe we should pause these proceedings to examine..." Counselor! Anderson's gavel crashed down like thunder. One more interruption and you'll be held in contempt alongside this woman. Wilson's client tugged his sleeve, whispering urgently. The young man facing drug possession charges understood that whatever was happening could affect his case. Lawyer, don't make the judge mad. I need him on my side. Sarah turned toward Wilson, her expression sympathetic but resolute. Counselor, your client's constitutional rights are protected regardless of judicial temperament. That's why these safeguards exist. Her words carried the weight of someone who'd spent years studying constitutional law, not someone who'd learned legal phrases from television shows. The specificity, the casual authority, it was unmistakable to anyone who knew the field. Officer Brown stepped closer to Davis, lowering her voice. Mitchell, maybe we should see what she's got. That case looks official. Davis's pride was wounded, his authority questioned in front of a room full of cameras. Patricia, we don't negotiate with disruptions. She could have printed that seal off the internet. Sarah overheard the exchange. Officer Brown, you're correct to be cautious. Officer Davis, this case contains documents that will fundamentally change how you view this situation. She opened the case slowly, theatrically, ensuring every phone camera captured the moment. Inside, organized in clear plastic sleeves, were documents bearing official seals, signatures, and letterheads that made Davis's breath catch. The first document was visible to those close enough. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Special Investigation Authorization. Judge Anderson's face had gone ashen. From his elevated position, he could make out enough of the document to understand its implications. Federal oversight, civil rights investigations, career-ending territory. This court, he announced, his voice noticeably less commanding, will take a 15-minute recess to address this irregularity. Your Honor, Sarah's voice cut through his retreat attempt. I'm afraid a recess won't be possible at this time. Anderson froze halfway to standing. Excuse me? These proceedings are now under federal observation. Any attempt to delay or adjourn without proper consultation would constitute obstruction of a federal investigation. The room erupted in whispers. Gallery members leaned forward, phones capturing every word. The live stream viewer count hit 47,000. News outlets were picking up the story, their crawlers already preparing alerts. Davis's hand finally dropped away from his handcuffs. The federal implications were sinking in. A simple courtroom disruption had become something far more serious, something that could end careers and trigger Department of Justice investigations. Officer Brown pulled Davis aside. We need to step back. This is above our pay grade. But the judge said, the judge doesn't outrank federal authority. And that woman isn't just some observer. Sarah remained motionless in the center of the courtroom, surrounded by scattered papers from her initial confrontation. Her briefcase lay open beside her, revealing additional documents, legal briefs, and what appeared to be case files spanning multiple jurisdictions. Wilson's client gripped his lawyer's arm. What's happening? Is this good or bad for me? I honestly don't know, Wilson whispered back. But I think we're about to find out who this woman really is. Judge Anderson slowly lowered himself back into his chair. His gavel remained in his hand, but its authority seemed diminished. Ma'am, perhaps you could clarify your presence in my courtroom. Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the building. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the expression of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this question. Certainly, Your Honor. I believe my full credentials will illuminate the situation considerably. She reached deeper into the case, withdrawing a second folder. This one bore a seal that made even the experienced court personnel take notice. The Supreme Court of the United States. The courtroom fell silent except for the barely audible sound of dozens of phones recording what was about to become the most significant moment in this municipal court's history. Sarah withdrew a laminated identification card from the Supreme Court folder. The seal gleamed under the courtroom light's authentic, official, impossible to fake. She held it up for the cameras, ensuring every phone captured the moment that would change everything. I am Dr. Sarah Williams, Chief Constitutional Consultant for the Federal Judicial Review Board, operating under direct authorization from the Supreme Court of the United States. The words hit the courtroom like a physical force. Judge Anderson's gavel slipped from his fingers, clattering onto his desk. Officer Davis stepped backward as if he'd been struck. The gallery erupted in gasps and whispers. Sarah continued, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to addressing the highest courts in the land. I am here conducting a federal review of due process violations in municipal courts under Title 42, Section 1983 of the United States Code. She gestured toward the scattered papers on the floor, the documents that had seemed so meaningless when Davis shoved her. These are preliminary findings from 6 months of covert observation in this judicial district. Officer Brown's training kicked in. She recognized federal authority when she confronted it. Ma'am, we had no way of knowing. Officer Brown, your response is noted and appreciated. However, Officer Davis, Sarah's gaze fixed on the man who had assaulted her minutes earlier, your actions in the past 12 minutes have been recorded not just by these citizens, but by federal monitoring equipment. She touched her left pearl earring delicately. This contains both audio and video recording devices, standard equipment for judicial review investigations. Every word, every action, every constitutional violation has been documented and transmitted in real time to federal servers. Davis's face drained of color. A federal recording of his assault on a Supreme Court official. Career suicide didn't begin to cover the implications. Defense Attorney Wilson stood slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Williams, I apologize for not recognizing your reputation in constitutional law is... Counselor, your silence during the assault will be noted in my report. However, your eventual attempt to intervene may be considered mitigating. Judge Anderson found his voice, though it cracked with strain. Dr. Williams, if I had known... Your Honor, you should have known the moment constitutional violations began occurring in your courtroom. That ignorance of proper procedure was precisely why this investigation was authorized. Sarah opened her tablet, the screen displaying official Department of Justice letterhead. Judge Anderson, we need to discuss the 17 documented constitutional violations I've recorded in your courtroom since March 15th. She swiped through screen after screen of data case numbers, violation types, patterns of bias that painted a damning picture of systematic discrimination. Case number MC 2024-0847, Fourth Amendment violation when you allowed Officer Davis to search a defendant without probable cause. Case number MC 2024-0923, Sixth Amendment violation when you denied adequate counsel consultation time. Case number MC 2024-1156, 14th Amendment violation when you imposed higher bail on similarly situated defendants based on zip code demographics. Each case citation hit Judge Anderson like a physical blow. These weren't general accusations, they were specific, documented, legally precise violations that could trigger federal intervention. The live stream viewer count had exploded to 89,000. Major news networks were picking up the feed. Number sign federal takedown was trending nationally. Rebecca Miller was broadcasting live from the courthouse steps, her reports being shared across every social media platform. Sarah's voice remained calm, methodical, devastating. Officer Davis, your actions today constitute assault on a federal official under Section 111 of Title 18 of the United States Code. The penalty range is 1 to 8 years in federal prison, depending on the severity of injury and intent. Davis's knees nearly buckled. Federal prison, his pension, his family's security, his future, all destroyed by 12 minutes of racist behavior caught on federal recording equipment. However, Sarah continued, this investigation isn't about punishment. It's about systematic reform. She produced a third document folder, This one marked Corrective Action Protocol. I have authority under emergency judicial review provisions to implement immediate corrective measures or recommend federal takeover of this court's operations. Judge Anderson's hands shook as he reached for his water glass. Dr. Williams, what would corrective measures entail? Complete restructuring of court procedures, mandatory bias training for all personnel, installation of federal monitoring systems, and quarterly compliance reviews. The alternative is suspension of your judicial authority pending Department of Justice investigation. She turned to address the gallery, acknowledging the cameras for the first time. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed today represents a larger pattern of constitutional violations affecting thousands of citizens in municipal courts across this district. The young law student in the back row raised her hand tentatively. Dr. Williams, can citizens file complaints about constitutional violations they've witnessed? Sarah smiled genuinely this time. Absolutely. The Federal Judicial Review Board has established a digital reporting system specifically for citizen observations. Your testimony and these recordings will be invaluable for ensuring systematic change. Officer Brown stepped forward, her voice respectful but urgent. Dr. Williams, what happens to us now? Are we under arrest? Officer Brown, your behavior today demonstrated appropriate caution and respect for federal authority. You'll be required to complete constitutional rights training, but no punitive action is recommended. She turned back to Davis, whose career hung in the balance. Officer Davis, your actions today violated multiple federal statutes. However, this is an opportunity for education rather than destruction if you're willing to acknowledge the harm caused and commit to change. Davis nodded frantically, understanding that his cooperation might be the only thing standing between him and federal prison. The courtroom had transformed completely. What began as a routine municipal hearing had become a constitutional law seminar broadcast to nearly 100,000 viewers nationwide. Federal authority had revealed itself through quiet dignity rather than dramatic confrontation. Sarah gathered her scattered papers, each document now understood to be a piece of federal evidence rather than ordinary legal work. Judge Anderson, I'll need to meet with you privately to discuss implementation timelines. This court's operations will be suspended pending compliance verification. The gavel that had symbolized Anderson's authority remained silent on his desk. Real power, constitutional, federal, systematic, had entered his courtroom disguised as a quietly dignified woman in a simple navy blazer. The cameras kept rolling as Sarah calmly repacked her briefcase, her mission far from over. Sarah opened her tablet to a dashboard displaying real-time federal data. Numbers, percentages, and compliance metrics filled the screen, the kind of information that could shut down entire court systems with a few keystrokes. Judge Anderson, let's examine the financial implications of constitutional non-compliance in your district. She turned the tablet toward the cameras, ensuring the live stream audience could see the official federal interface. The viewer count had reached 127,000, with major news networks now carrying the story live. This judicial district processes 12,847 cases annually, generating $3.2 million in court fees, fines, and administrative revenue. However, your constitutional compliance rate currently sits at 34%, well below the federal minimum threshold of 75%. Judge Anderson's face went gray. I wasn't aware there was a specific threshold. Under the Civil Rights Attorneys' Fees Act of 1976, amended by the Prison Litigation Reform Act, courts maintaining compliance rates below 50% trigger automatic Department of Justice intervention. Your district has been operating in violation of federal standards for 8 consecutive months. Sarah swiped to the next screen, revealing a detailed breakdown that made Officer Davis visibly sweat. 68% of due process violations in this court occur in cases involving African American defendants. This statistical disparity exceeds the threshold for systematic discrimination under Section 1983 civil rights violations. She highlighted specific numbers with her finger. Officer Davis, your personal violation rate is 23% above the district average. In federal terms, that constitutes a pattern of civil rights abuse requiring immediate corrective action. The data was undeniable, presented with the clinical precision of someone who understood exactly how federal oversight systems worked. Each number represented real cases, real people, real constitutional violations that had been meticulously documented. The financial consequences are severe, Sarah continued, switching to a federal funding dashboard. This court receives $847,000 annually in federal grants for operations, technology, and personnel training. Constitutional compliance violations trigger automatic funding suspension under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Judge Anderson leaned forward, finally grasping the full scope of his predicament. Dr. Williams, if federal funding is suspended, your municipal budget faces an immediate 23% reduction in courthouse operations. That translates to staff layoffs, reduced hours, and potential closure of satellite court facilities serving rural communities in your district. The numbers weren't theoretical. They represented real consequences for real people court clerks with mortgages, bailiffs with families, communities that depended on local judicial services. Sarah's voice remained steady, professional, devastating. However, financial penalties are only the beginning. Under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, individual officials can face personal liability for willful constitutional violations. The current precedent establishes damages at $50,000 per documented incident where qualified immunity doesn't apply. Officer Davis did quick mental math and nearly collapsed. 23 incidents over 6 months. Potential personal liability exceeding $1.1 million. His house, his children's college funds, his retirement, everything was at risk. Judge Anderson, your personal exposure is more significant. Judicial immunity doesn't protect against clearly established constitutional violations committed in clear disregard of federal law. Your documented pattern suggests willful disregard rather than good faith error. The live stream comment section exploded with legal experts weighing in. Harvard law professors were sharing the stream. CLU attorneys were taking notes. This wasn't just a local story anymore. It was a masterclass in federal civil rights enforcement being broadcast nationwide. Sarah produced a thick folder marked Compliance Assessment, Confidential. I have authority under emergency judicial review provisions to implement one of 3 options within the next 24 hours. She opened the folder, revealing official Department of Justice letterhead with multiple signature lines and federal seals. Option 1. Immediate federal takeover of all court operations pending comprehensive review. Timeline, indefinite, possibly 18 to 24 months. Judge Anderson's career flashed before his eyes. Federal takeover meant disgrace, unemployment, potential criminal charges if the investigation uncovered criminal civil rights violations. Option 2. Voluntary compliance program with federal monitoring and mandatory corrective action. Timeline, 12 months of intensive oversight with quarterly progress reviews. This option offered survival, though under humiliating federal supervision that would effectively end his independence as a judge. Option 3. Complete restructuring under federal consent decree with permanent monitoring and annual compliance audits. Timeline, minimum 5 years of federal oversight. Sarah let the options sink in before continuing. Each option requires different levels of cooperation, financial investment, and personal accountability. However, non-compliance with any option triggers automatic criminal referral to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Defense Attorney Wilson found his voice. Dr. Williams, what happens to pending cases? My client and others. Excellent question, Counselor. All cases processed during the violation period are subject to constitutional review. Defendants who received inadequate due process may have grounds for dismissal, sentence reduction, or complete case reversal. Wilson's client suddenly understood. The racist behavior that had seemed so threatening minutes earlier might actually result in his charges being dismissed due to constitutional violations in the court proceedings. Sarah turned back to Judge Anderson. "Your Honor, I need your decision on compliance options within 1 hour. Federal law requires immediate action once violations reach this severity level." She displayed a final screen showing real-time federal oversight data. 12 other municipal courts in this region are currently under similar review. 3 have chosen federal takeover rather than compliance. Their judges are no longer practicing law. The threat was clear, specific, and backed by federal authority that no local official could challenge. Officer Davis stepped forward, his voice barely audible. "Dr. Williams, what do I need to do? I have kids, a mortgage. I can't lose everything over this." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Officer Davis, acknowledgement of wrongdoing is the first step. Federal law provides pathways for corrective action rather than purely punitive measures, if you're genuinely committed to change." She produced a tablet with a digital form. Voluntary enrollment in federal civil rights training, public acknowledgement of constitutional violations, and cooperation with ongoing monitoring. Complete the program successfully, and criminal charges become unlikely. The live stream audience watched a federal official offering redemption through education rather than destruction through punishment. It was a masterclass in using institutional power for systematic change rather than personal revenge. Judge Anderson's voice cracked as he spoke. "Dr. Williams, I choose voluntary compliance. Full cooperation with federal oversight." Sarah nodded, making notes on her tablet. "Judge Anderson, your cooperation is noted. Implementation begins immediately." She stood, gathering her materials with the same calm dignity she'd maintained throughout the confrontation. Federal authority had been exercised not through dramatic threats, but through precise legal knowledge and unshakable institutional power. The courtroom remained silent, except for the soft clicking of phones still recording. What had begun as a routine hearing had become a federal case study in constitutional enforcement broadcast to over 150,000 viewers nationwide. Sarah's quiet revolution was just beginning. 6 weeks later, the transformation was complete. Judge Anderson stood before a packed courtroom, his voice carrying genuine remorse as he addressed the gathered crowd. "I want to formally apologize to Dr. Sarah Williams and to every citizen who has been denied constitutional due process in this court." The live stream from that December morning had reached 2.3 million views. The hashtag #constitutional accountability had sparked a nationwide conversation about judicial reform. Sarah sat in the front row, no longer an observer but an official federal monitor. "Effective immediately," Anderson continued, "this court operates under federal oversight with new policies designed to protect every citizen's constitutional rights." Behind him, a large monitor displayed the Justice Watch dashboard, a real-time constitutional violation tracking system that had been installed in 847 municipal courts across 12 states. Green indicators showed compliance. Red alerts triggered immediate federal response. Officer Davis, completing his final week of suspension, watched from the back of the courtroom. His 40 hours of federal civil rights training had been humbling, educational, and ultimately transformative. His children had watched the viral video of his behavior, leading to difficult conversations about respect, dignity, and the Constitution their father had sworn to protect. "Today marks the launch of our Constitutional Rights Observer Program," Judge Anderson announced. "Trained federal monitors will conduct monthly unannounced reviews of court proceedings to ensure continued compliance." Sarah stepped to the podium, her presence now welcomed rather than rejected. "Ladies and gentlemen, systematic change requires more than individual accountability. It demands institutional transformation." She activated the wall monitor, showing implementation results from the past 6 weeks. Policy Implementation Number 1. Constitutional Rights Observer Program. We now have 47 trained federal monitors conducting reviews across this judicial district. The display showed real data: 312 court proceedings observed, 23 violations identified and immediately corrected, 8 officers enrolled in additional training, 0 repeat violations. Policy implementation number 2, mandatory bias training for all court personnel, conducted quarterly rather than annually. The screen showed completion rates: 100% of judges, 98% of bailiffs, 100% of court clerks. Court reporter Linda Thompson, who had completed her own federal training program, took notes with newfound attention to constitutional accuracy. She now understood that her transcription work was part of the constitutional protection system, not just administrative paperwork. Policy implementation number 3, body cameras for all bailiffs during court proceedings, with footage automatically uploaded to federal servers for review. Officer Brown, wearing her new body camera, felt the weight of constant accountability. But she'd discovered something unexpected. The cameras made her feel more professional, more careful, more conscious of representing justice rather than just enforcing order. Sarah continued, "The technology component has been revolutionary. Our Justice Watch app allows citizens to report constitutional violations in real time with automatic notification to federal oversight teams. The app had already processed 847 citizen reports across the district. Most were resolved within 24 hours through immediate corrective action rather than lengthy legal proceedings. But technology alone cannot create justice," Sarah said, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had spent decades studying constitutional law. "We need cultural transformation." She clicked to the next slide. Educational partnerships. The screen showed logos from 5 law schools, 3 universities, and multiple community organizations. Harvard Law School students now conduct constitutional literacy workshops in affected communities. Citizens learn their rights not through violation, but through proactive education. In the gallery, Maria Santos, a local teacher, nodded approvingly. She'd attended 3 workshops and now felt confident addressing constitutional issues in her own encounters with municipal authorities. High school civics programs now include mandatory courtroom observation, allowing students to witness constitutional protections in action rather than just reading about them in textbooks. The Know Your Rights seminars had reached 3,400 community members across the district. Public knowledge of constitutional protections had measurably improved, creating informed citizens who could recognize and report violations. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she outlined the most significant changes. Individual accountability measures have been transformative. Judge Anderson completed 120 hours of federal diversity and constitutional law education, far exceeding minimum requirements. Anderson nodded, acknowledging that the education had been challenging but necessary. He'd learned about implicit bias, constitutional history, and the real-world impact of judicial decisions on citizens' lives. Officer Davis voluntarily enrolled in community service programs, spending 200 hours working with civil rights organizations to understand the perspective of those he'd previously mistreated. Davis had worked with the NAACP, attended community meetings, and listened to stories from citizens who'd experienced discriminatory treatment. The experience had fundamentally changed his approach to law enforcement. Performance reviews for all court personnel now include bias incident tracking, constitutional violation monitoring, and community feedback integration. The new accountability system was comprehensive but fair, focusing on education and improvement rather than punishment and termination. Sarah clicked to the results dashboard. The outcomes speak for themselves. Constitutional violations in this district have decreased by 89% in 6 weeks. Citizen satisfaction with court proceedings has increased by 67%. Federal compliance ratings have risen from 34% to 94%. The numbers represented real change affecting real people's lives. Citizens felt safer, more respected, more confident that their constitutional rights would be protected in municipal court proceedings. Most significantly, Sarah continued, this model is being replicated nationwide. The Department of Justice has approved expansion to 23 additional judicial districts, potentially affecting 2.1 million citizens annually. The live stream audience, now 45,000 viewers following the reform implementation, watched as systematic change unfolded through institutional pressure rather than individual lawsuits. Defense Attorney Wilson stood to address the court. Dr. Williams, on behalf of the legal community, I want to thank you for demonstrating that justice can be achieved through education and systematic reform rather than adversarial litigation. His client from that December morning had indeed seen his charges dismissed due to constitutional violations in the original proceedings. But more importantly, future defendants would receive proper constitutional protections from the beginning. Sarah's final slide showed the broader impact. The Justice Watch monitoring system has been adopted by federal courts, state appellate courts, and municipal systems in 12 states. Constitutional violations across all monitored courts have decreased by 73%. She closed her presentation with quiet authority. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened in this courtroom 6 weeks ago proves that individual expertise, federal oversight, and community engagement can transform entire systems of justice. The applause was sustained, respectful, and genuine. Citizens, court personnel, and legal professionals understood they had witnessed something rare. Institutional change achieved through knowledge, dignity, and systematic pressure rather than conflict and litigation. Judge Anderson's gavel, the same one that had remained silent during her original humiliation, now called the session to order under new constitutional protections that would safeguard every citizen's rights. Sarah gathered her materials, her mission in this district complete, but her larger work continuing across the nation. 1 year after that December morning, Dr. Sarah Williams stood before the Harvard Law Review editorial board, presenting findings that would reshape constitutional enforcement nationwide. The embedded observation methodology has fundamentally changed how we approach judicial oversight, she explained to the assembled legal scholars. Her research had been cited in 12 federal appellate decisions and adopted by the Department of Justice as standard protocol. The case study, Constitutional Enforcement Through Strategic Intervention, had become required reading in constitutional law programs across the country. Law students competed for positions in the Federal Judicial Review Board's new internship program, eager to participate in systematic reform efforts. Behind Sarah, data streams showed the expanding impact. The Justice Watch monitoring system now operated in 847 courts across 23 states. Constitutional violations had decreased by 73% in monitored jurisdictions. More importantly, public trust in the judicial system had measurably improved. The key insight, Sarah continued, was recognizing that individual incidents of bias represent systematic failures requiring institutional solutions. Her approach had been studied by international delegations from 12 countries, seeking to improve their own judicial systems. The quiet dignity she'd displayed during her humiliation had become a model for effective civil rights advocacy. Judge Anderson, now completing his second year under federal oversight, had become an unexpected advocate for constitutional reform. His court operated as a model facility, hosting visiting judges who wanted to implement similar monitoring systems. Dr. Williams saved my career by forcing me to confront my own biases, he'd told a judicial training conference the previous month. Federal oversight wasn't punishment. It was education that made me a better judge. Officer Davis had completed his civil rights training and community service, becoming a certified instructor for constitutional policing programs. His children had watched him testify before a congressional subcommittee about the importance of bias training for law enforcement. I was raised to see certain people as threats, he'd said during his testimony. Dr. Williams showed me how to see everyone as citizens deserving constitutional protection. The ripple effects extended far beyond one courtroom. Rebecca Miller's investigative reporting on the case had won a Peabody Award for Excellence in Journalism, covering civil rights. Her follow-up series, Constitutional Blind Spots, had prompted reforms in municipal courts across 7 states. Defense Attorney Wilson had founded a pro bono clinic specializing in constitutional violations in municipal courts. His organization had handled 347 cases in the past year, with an 89% success rate in achieving dismissals or sentence reductions for defendants whose rights had been violated. Most significantly, the community response had been transformative. The Know Your Rights workshops had expanded into a national program, reaching 23,000 citizens annually. Constitutional literacy rates in affected communities had increased by 67%, creating informed citizens capable of recognizing and reporting violations. Maria Santos, the teacher who'd attended the early workshops, now coordinated constitutional education programs in local schools. Her students regularly visited courtrooms as part of their civics education, witnessing constitutional protections in action. Dr. Williams showed us that knowledge is power, Maria explained to her latest class. Understanding your constitutional rights means you can protect them. The technological innovations had been equally transformative. The Justice Watch app had processed over 12,000 citizen reports, with 94% resolved through immediate corrective action rather than lengthy litigation. Real-time constitutional monitoring had proven more effective than traditional complaint systems. Federal courts had adopted similar monitoring protocols, creating unprecedented transparency in judicial proceedings. Citizens could access real-time compliance data for their local courts, fostering accountability through public awareness. Sarah's methodology had influenced policy at the highest levels. The Supreme Court had cited her research in 3 recent decisions involving judicial oversight and constitutional compliance. Chief Justice Roberts had personally commended her innovative approach to systematic constitutional enforcement. But the most profound impact was personal transformation. The individuals involved in that December morning confrontation had each found ways to contribute to larger change. Court reporter Thompson had become a trainer for constitutional transcription accuracy, helping court reporters understand their role in protecting due process rights. Her attention to detail had prevented several potential constitutional violations in other courts. Officer Brown had been promoted to training supervisor, implementing constitutional awareness programs for municipal law enforcement. Her experience witnessing federal intervention had made her a powerful advocate for proactive compliance. The young law student who'd recorded the original confrontation had graduated and joined the ACLU, specializing in municipal court reform. Her footage from that morning had become evidence in federal civil rights cases across multiple jurisdictions. Even Wilson's former client, whose drug charges had been dismissed due to constitutional violations, had become an advocate for judicial reform. He spoke regularly at community meetings about the importance of constitutional protections for all citizens, regardless of their circumstances. The financial impact had been substantial, but positive. Courts operating under federal monitoring had seen decreased litigation costs, improved efficiency, and increased federal funding due to compliance excellence. Constitutional adherence had proven profitable as well as ethical. Sarah's pearl earrings, those tiny recording devices that had captured federal evidence, had become symbolic. The Department of Justice now equipped all judicial review investigators with similar technology, ensuring that constitutional violations were documented with federal-grade evidence. The live stream from that December morning continued to educate. With over 4.2 million views, it served as a training tool for law enforcement, judicial personnel, and citizens learning about constitutional rights. Comment sections had become forums for sharing similar experiences and discussing reform strategies. As Sarah concluded her Harvard presentation, she reflected on the broader lessons. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't anger, it's expertise. Real change happens when preparation meets opportunity, and when individual knowledge serves systematic transformation. The audience, future lawyers, judges, and civil rights advocates understood they were witnessing the evolution of constitutional enforcement. Quiet dignity and federal authority had achieved more than dramatic confrontation ever could. But Sarah's work was far from over. 17 additional judicial districts awaited federal review. Constitutional violations continued in unmonitored courts. The systematic change she'd pioneered needed to expand until every citizen enjoyed equal protection under law. That December morning had proven that one person's constitutional knowledge could transform entire systems of justice. Now it was time for others to follow her example. Have you witnessed bias in institutional settings? Your observations matter. Constitutional violations happen in courtrooms, police encounters, and municipal offices across the country. Citizens like you can document these violations and report them through established federal channels. Share this story to raise awareness about constitutional rights in judicial proceedings. When people understand their protections, they can recognize violations and demand accountability from public officials. Learn about the Justice Watch app and similar monitoring tools in your area. Download the app, report violations, and participate in the systematic reform that protects everyone's constitutional rights. Subscribe for more real-life stories of ordinary people creating extraordinary change through knowledge, dignity, and strategic action. These touching stories prove that systematic transformation is possible when citizens understand their power. Tell us about Black stories of justice you've witnessed in your communities. Your experiences contribute to the larger narrative of constitutional protection and civil rights progress. Share your observations in the comments below. Constitutional expertise combined with quiet courage can dismantle systems of oppression more effectively than confrontation alone. When we understand our rights and exercise them strategically, we create lasting change that protects everyone's dignity and freedom.